The coffee was cold. Captain Derek Viper Morrison noticed it first, the way the styrofoam cup trembled in the turbulence at 37,000 feet. Commercial aviation had a rhythm to it, a predictable drone that let your mind wander into places you'd rather it didn't go. He was 3 rows back on United Flight 2847, Seattle to Boston, trying not to think about the simulation scores that had landed him on mandatory leave. Trying not to think about the empty seat in the ready room that used to belong to someone who flew like gravity was optional. The attendant moved down the aisle with practiced efficiency, her movements economical in the cramped space. Something about the way she carried herself made Morrison's eyes linger. Military bearing, maybe, or just the kind of awareness that comes from years of scanning horizons for threats that might never materialize. She wore her dark hair pulled back tight, accentuating sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to catalog everything without appearing to look at anything directly. "More coffee, sir." Her voice was professional, forgettable, the kind that could blend into any crowd. Morrison nodded, watching as she poured with the steady hand of someone who'd done more delicate work than serving beverages. No ring on her finger, a small scar along her jawline, the kind you got from something fast and unforgiving. When she moved to the next row, he caught the edge of a tattoo on her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve. Wings, not the commercial kind. The Boeing 737 shuddered again, harder this time. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, something about unexpected weather patterns and a slight course correction. Standard procedure. Nothing to worry about. But Morrison had logged enough flight hours to know when a pilot's voice carried the wrong kind of tension, the subtle tightening that meant instruments were showing things they shouldn't show. His phone buzzed. A text from his wingman still stationed at Langley. "You see the news. Russian bombers playing chicken with Alaskan airspace again. 3rd time this month." Morrison typed back one-handed, "I'm on leave, remember, not my problem." But his eyes drifted forward toward the cockpit door, then back to the attendant in 17A's aisle who had stopped moving entirely. She was listening to something, head tilted at an angle that wasn't quite natural for someone worried about beverage service. Her left hand had moved to her hip, fingers drumming a pattern Morrison recognized from somewhere deep in his operational memory. Not random, tactical, counting. The aircraft banked sharply left. Too sharply. Coffee cups hit the floor. Overhead compartments rattled. The attendant's hand shot out, steadying herself against a seat back with the reflexes of someone who'd pulled more than passenger-grade G-forces. That's when Morrison noticed her eyes had changed. No longer the forgettable brown of customer service. Now they were calculating distances, angles, threats. The eyes of someone who'd flown into darkness and come back alive. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain." The voice had lost its rehearsed calm. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The attendant moved forward toward the cockpit, her walk transforming into something else entirely. Morrison unbuckled his seatbelt and followed, his training overriding civilian protocols. 3 other passengers started to rise in panic, but she turned and made a single-hand gesture that sat them back down instantly. Not a request, a command. She knocked on the cockpit door with a specific pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. Morrison's blood went cold. That was a military recognition code, outdated by at least a decade but unmistakable to anyone who'd flown combat missions in the Middle East. The door opened a crack. "Ma'am, you need to return to," the co-pilot started, but she was already talking, her voice completely different now. Lower, clipped, precise. "I'm hearing cross-chatter on the emergency frequency. Someone's painting you with targeting radar. You need to get below 10,000 feet and turn off your transponder. Now." The co-pilot's face went white. "How do you?" "Because I used to do the painting." She pushed into the cockpit. Morrison was right behind her. The captain turned, ready to physically remove them both, until he saw Morrison's face and the military ID card he was already holding up. "I'm Air Force 1st Fighter Wing," Morrison said quickly, "and I think you should listen to her." The instruments told a story that made Morrison's stomach drop. 3 unidentified aircraft had appeared on the collision radar, closing fast from the northwest. No transponder codes, no response to radio hails, just clean, cold trajectories that spoke of hostile intent. The attendant was already in the jump seat, scanning the displays with eyes that absorbed information faster than the pilots could process it. 20 miles out and descending to intercept altitude, she said. "They're not commercial. Look at that rate of descent. Those are fighters." "That's impossible," the captain said, but his hand was already reaching for the controls. "We're over American airspace. We have escort protocols." "Your escort protocols assume the threat is coming from outside." The attendant's fingers moved across the co-pilot's tablet, pulling up military aviation bands that shouldn't have been accessible to civilians. "Someone's jamming the emergency frequencies. Your distress calls aren't getting through." Morrison leaned over her shoulder, watching the radar returns. She was right. The aircraft weren't following any commercial or standard military flight pattern. They were hunting, herding the 737 towards something or away from something. "What's your background?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him. "Does it matter?" It might. The unidentified aircraft were 15 miles out now, close enough that Morrison could calculate intercept time in his head. 4 minutes, maybe less. "Because if you know what I think you know, we're about to need someone who can talk to them." The attendant's jaw tightened. For a moment Morrison thought she wouldn't answer. Then she reached up and tugged her sleeve higher, revealing the full tattoo. Not commercial wings, fighter pilot wings. And beneath them, in small, precise script, 332nd Fighter Squadron, the Red Tails, one of the most decorated units in modern Air Force history. "Name's Kestrel," she said. "Major Reyna Kestrel Valdez, retired. And those aren't Russian bombers out there, Captain. Those are F-15s, American F-15s, which means either someone's running a training exercise nobody told commercial aviation about, or something's gone very wrong at NORAD." The cockpit went silent except for the whine of the engines and the increasingly frantic beeping of the collision warning system. 10 miles. Morrison pulled out his phone, trying every military contact he had, but every call dropped before connecting. The jamming was sophisticated, military grade. Whoever was doing this had resources. "Can you fly this thing?" Morrison asked Valdez. "It's been 7 years since I left active duty," she said, "and I never flew commercial." "That's not what I asked." Her eyes met his, and Morrison saw something in them that made his pulse quicken. Not fear, recognition, the look of someone who'd been waiting for a call back to service that she'd thought would never come. "Yes," Valdez said, "I can fly it." The captain started to protest, but the radio crackled to life with a voice that cut through all objections. "Military, male, young, aggressive. United 2847, this is Sabre Flight. You are ordered to follow our heading immediately. Any deviation will be considered hostile action. Acknowledge." Morrison grabbed the radio before the captain could respond. "Sabre Flight, this is Captain Derek Morrison, 1st Fighter Wing, currently aboard 2847. Under what authority are you intercepting a commercial aircraft over American airspace? Provide authentication code." "Static then. Authentication is classified. You have 30 seconds to comply." Valdez was already moving, sliding into the captain's seat as he stumbled backward in shock. Her hands found the controls with the muscle memory of someone who'd spent 10,000 hours trusting her life to hydraulics and thrust. Morrison saw the moment her entire bearing changed, saw the civilian mask drop completely away. "Sabre Flight, this is Major Reyna Valdez, 332nd Fighter Squadron. I'm declaring an emergency under Title 14 CFR Section 91.3. This aircraft is under my command. Break off your intercept." The response came after a longer pause. When the voice returned, it had changed. Younger, uncertain. Say again your call sign. Kestrel, 332nd Fighter Squadron, Red Tails, 12th Air Force. I flew combat missions over Syria and Yemen. I held the line at Al-Tanf when your training wing was still using simulators. Now break off or I'll have your wings and your career before this bird touches ground. Another pause. Morrison could almost hear the pilot checking records, calling back to base, trying to verify what seemed impossible. A retired fighter pilot flying commercial. The radio crackled. Major Valdez, this is Sabre 2. Stand by for authentication. Negative, Valdez said, her voice cutting through like a blade. You intercept a commercial aircraft, you provide authentication first. That's the protocol, Lieutenant. Or did they stop teaching that at training command? The collision warning was screaming now. 6 miles. Morrison could see them through the cockpit windows, 3 dark shapes against the cloud cover, F-15 Eagles in tight formation. Beautiful aircraft. Deadly. And currently between them and any chance of a safe landing. Major, we have our orders. I don't care about your orders, Valdez cut in. I care about the 200 civilians behind me who didn't sign up for whatever game you're playing. You want to shoot down an airliner, Lieutenant. You want that on your conscience, because I'm not complying. Morrison watched her hands on the controls, steady, confident. She'd already mapped the terrain in her head, calculated fuel reserves, identified potential emergency landing sites. Everything a combat pilot does automatically, even 7 years after retirement. The question was whether the F-15s would call her bluff. The radio exploded with cross-chatter. Multiple voices now arguing, command structure breaking down in real time. Morrison heard fragments, not authorized. Standing orders. Confirm identity. Then a new voice, older, carrying weight. Sabre flight, this is Overwatch. Hold your intercept. Say again, hold position and stand by. The F-15s banked away, climbing to maintain visual contact but no longer closing. Valdez's shoulders dropped half an inch, the only sign of tension releasing. Morrison exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The captain was white-faced against the bulkhead, the co-pilot staring at Valdez like she'd conjured the aircraft's salvation from empty air. Overwatch, this is Major Valdez. I need direct communication with NORAD Command. Whatever's happening here, it's above these pilots' pay grade and mine. Someone needs to explain why American fighters just tried to force down a civilian aircraft over Montana. Stand by, Major. But Morrison was watching the radar. The 3 F-15s had moved to escort positions, but something else had appeared on the screen, higher, faster. The return signature was wrong for commercial, wrong even for the Eagles. Valdez, he said quietly, we've got another contact, 60,000 feet closing from the east, Mach 0.9 and accelerating. She saw it, her eyes narrowed. That's an F-22 flight profile. Raptors don't intercept domestic commercial traffic. No, Valdez agreed. They don't. Her hand moved to the radio again, but before she could transmit, the new voice came through. Different frequency. Encrypted channel that somehow the 737's radio was picking up anyway. Female. Cold. Precise. United 2847, this is Reaper 1. Major Valdez, I need you to listen very carefully. The aircraft you're flying is not supposed to exist anymore. It was scheduled for decommission 3 weeks ago. Someone put it back in service with passengers aboard. That someone wants you specifically on this flight. This is not a coincidence. Morrison's blood turned to ice. He looked at Valdez, saw the recognition in her eyes. Who is this? She demanded. Someone who flew with you in Syria. Someone who knows what you're capable of and why someone might want you dead. That 737 has been modified. I don't know how yet, but I'm looking at sensor data that says you're carrying something in your cargo hold that's putting out enough radiation to light up our threat boards from 100 miles away. The cockpit went silent. Morrison's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Dirty bomb, stolen nuclear material, biological weapon. The F-15s hadn't been trying to force them down. They'd been trying to keep them away from population centers. Valdez's voice was steady. Reaper 1, if you're going to shoot us down, get it over with. But these people don't deserve to die for someone else's game. I'm not going to shoot you down, Kestrel, but I need you to do exactly what I say. There's an abandoned airstrip 30 miles northwest of your position. Former Strategic Air Command Base, been closed for 20 years. I'm transmitting coordinates now. You need to land there. No exceptions. And if I refuse, then I'll have no choice but to ensure that aircraft doesn't reach any civilian population center. I know you understand what that means. Morrison watched Valdez's face, saw the calculations happening behind her eyes, tactical decisions made in fractions of seconds with incomplete information and no good options. It was the kind of choice fighter pilots trained for and hoped never to face. 3 minutes of fuel decided everyone's fate. Captain Morrison, Valdez said quietly, not taking her eyes off the instruments. I need you to go back to the cabin. Tell the passengers we're making an emergency landing. Keep them calm. Don't mention anything about weapons or threats, just mechanical failure. You can't seriously be considering. I'm considering keeping these people alive. Now move. Morrison hesitated, then nodded and pushed out of the cockpit. Behind him, he heard Valdez key the radio. Reaper 1, this is Kestrel. I'm accepting your offer, but I want something in exchange. When we land, I want answers. Real answers. Not operational security bullshit. Someone put me on this plane for a reason, and I want to know who and why. Agreed. Now descend to 12,000 feet and follow my heading. The abandoned strip has a 10,000-foot runway, but it hasn't been maintained in decades. The landing's going to be rough. Rough I can handle, Valdez said. It's the aftermath I'm worried about. Morrison made his way down the aisle, maintaining the calm expression of someone dealing with minor inconvenience rather than potential catastrophe. Passengers looked up from phones and tablets, sensing the wrongness but not yet panicked. He spotted 3 more who carried themselves like Valdez, like Morrison himself. Veterans. Their eyes followed his movements, reading body language, preparing for whatever came next. He reached for the intercom handset, composing lies that might save lives. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. We're experiencing a minor technical issue that requires us to make an unscheduled landing. There's no immediate danger, but as a precaution, our pilot is diverting to the nearest available airfield. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened and all loose items are stowed. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing. The words came easily. He'd told similar lies before in different aircraft, over different terrain. The art of leadership was knowing when truth served and when it didn't. Right now, 200 people needed calm more than facts. The 737 nosed down, engines changing pitch. Through the windows, Morrison could see the F-15s maintaining position, deadly shadows against the afternoon sun. And somewhere above them, invisible in the thin air, an F-22 Raptor guided them toward answers that Morrison suspected would be worse than any question. He thought about the tattoo on Valdez's wrist, the red tails, the legends who'd broken barriers and blazed trails through hostile skis. She'd walked away from that legacy to serve coffee at 37,000 feet, hiding behind a name tag and a uniform that wasn't hers. Now she was back in the seat, fingers on the controls, making choices that would ripple through lives she'd never meet. Morrison wondered if she'd been running from something or toward it. Wondered if she'd known, somehow, that the sky would call her back. Fighter pilots never really retired. They just waited for the moment when gravity and duty aligned again, pulling them back into the thin air where they belonged, where nothing made sense except speed and vectors and the absolute clarity of flight. The aircraft shuddered as Valdez throttled back, bleeding off altitude. Morrison gripped a seat back, watching the faces around him. Fear, confusion, trust placed in strangers who held lives in their hands. It was a weight Morrison knew well, had carried through combat zones and training exercises and quiet moments alone in cockpits where the only sound was his own breathing and the whisper of the wind. Valdez was carrying that weight now, 7 years after she'd set it down. And Morrison had the unsettling feeling that whatever waited for them on that abandoned runway would be heavier still. The descent continued. The sky outside darkened at the edges, storm clouds rolling in from the west like an omen. Morrison closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done since his last mission. He prayed to whatever gods watched over pilots who flew too close to the sun and lived to tell about it. Below them, somewhere in the Montana wilderness, an abandoned runway waited like a grave or a resurrection. Morrison couldn't tell which. Maybe Valdez couldn't either, but she was flying toward it anyway, because that's what fighter pilots did. They flew into the darkness and trusted their instruments and training to bring them home. Even when home was a place they'd never been, and the darkness had teeth. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan that vibrated through the entire airframe. Morrison felt it in his bones, that commitment to descent, the point where you either touched down or died trying. No third option, no going back. Just the runway rushing up and the engine screaming and your hands steady on the controls because anything else meant everyone died. He opened his eyes and moved toward the front of the cabin, positioning himself where he could see both the passengers and the cockpit. Professional distance masking absolute terror, the art of command. Through the cockpit door, partially open now, Morrison could see Valdez's silhouette against the instruments. Straight back, hands moving with precise economy. The body language of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, who knew exactly how many feet of runway she needed and how many she'd actually get, and the razor-thin margin between them. The F-15s were still visible through the windows, dark angels in escort formation. Morrison wondered what their pilots were thinking, whether they understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. A retired fighter pilot bringing home a compromised aircraft on a runway that barely existed, with cargo that might kill everyone within 100 miles, and 200 souls who had no idea how close they were to becoming a footnote in classified military reports. The radio crackled one more time. Reaper One's voice, softer now, almost gentle. "Kestrel, you're at 200 feet, runway in sight, you've got this." Valdez didn't respond. Didn't need to. Her hands told the story, adjusting the trim, feathering the engines, reading the wind that buffeted the aircraft like it was a language only she could speak. Morrison watched the altimeter drop. 150 feet. 150. The wheels kissed the runway, and the world exploded into noise and chaos. The sound of ancient concrete meeting modern aircraft, the screams of stressed metal and burning rubber, the overhead compartments bursting open and baggage tumbling free. Morrison grabbed a seat back and held on, watching Valdez fight the controls as the 737 skidded and bounced and screamed its way toward a stop that might never come. The fuselage groaned. Something in the tail section gave way with a sharp crack. The aircraft slewed left, right, left again, Valdez's hands dancing on the controls, every instinct from 10,000 hours in fighter jets translating imperfectly to a massive commercial bird that handled like a pregnant whale. The runway blurred past, chunks of concrete flying, one of the engines coughing black smoke. Then, impossibly, they were slowing. The aircraft straightened. The screaming metal quieted to a wounded moan. Through the windows, Morrison could see grass and dirt and the skeletal remains of hangars long abandoned. They rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust and debris, the engines winding down, alarms blaring from a dozen different systems. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The cabin was silent except for the alarms and the ragged breathing of 200 people who just touched the knife edge of death and lived. Morrison's legs felt weak. His hands were shaking. He forced them still and turned to face the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Emergency services are on their way. Another lie, but a necessary one. In the cockpit, Valdez was already unbuckling, moving with the controlled urgency of someone executing a checklist burned into muscle memory. Shut down engines, cut fuel, kill electrical, every action designed to keep the wounded bird from becoming a fireball. Morrison pushed forward to help, but she waved him off. Get everyone to the emergency exits, she said. Slides deployed. I want this cabin empty in 90 seconds. Move. Morrison moved, shouted commands to the flight attendants who were already in motion, training overcoming shock. The exits cracked open. Yellow slides unfurled. Passengers began to evacuate, some calm, others panicked, all of them alive because a woman serving coffee had remembered how to fly. Through the cockpit window, Morrison saw military vehicles approaching across the broken tarmac. Humvees and transport trucks moving fast. In the sky above, the F-15s had peeled off, but something else was descending. The F-22, Reaper 1, coming down like a raptor to survey its domain. Valdez stood in the cockpit doorway, watching the evacuation with eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. Morrison joined her, both of them silent as the last passengers slid to safety. The abandoned airfield was crawling with soldiers now, weapons raised, creating a perimeter around the 737. Whatever's in that cargo hold, Valdez said quietly, it's about to become someone else's problem. Morrison nodded. What do you think it is? I think someone wanted to kill me and didn't care how many others died in the process, or wanted me alive for something worse. Either way, we're about to find out which. The military vehicles screeched to a halt 50 yards from the aircraft. Soldiers in hazmat suits emerged, approaching cautiously with equipment that looked designed for radiological threats. Morrison felt his stomach drop. If Valdez was carrying a dirty bomb, this entire operation was already too late. The exposure time, the proximity to population centers during the flight, the dispersal patterns if containment was breached. Stop thinking, Valdez said. It won't help. She was right. Thinking got you killed in combat. Action kept you alive. So Morrison cleared his mind and followed Valdez down the emergency slide, hitting the ground in a controlled roll that his knees protested but his training demanded. They came up together, hands visible, making no threatening moves as soldiers surrounded them. A figure approached from the lead vehicle, female, flight suit bearing the markings of an F-22 pilot, major's rank insignia. She pulled off her helmet and Morrison's breath caught. Late 30s, sharp features, eyes like chips of ice. She looked at Valdez with an expression Morrison couldn't read. Recognition, respect, something deeper. Hello, Kestrel, she said. Been a long time. Not long enough, Maya, Valdez replied. Last time I saw you, we were pulling 5GS over Aleppo and you were telling me to trust you. Didn't work out so well. The woman, Reaper 1, Major Maya something, smiled without warmth. You lived. I call that working out. My wingman didn't. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with history Morrison didn't understand. Maya's expression flickered just for a moment. Then the professional mask returned. We need to debrief you, both of you. There's a facility 2 miles north, transport's waiting. What about the passengers? Morrison asked. They're being quarantined. Medical screening, exposure assessment. Standard protocol for this type of event. What type of event? Valdez demanded. Someone put a bomb on my plane, tried to kill me, used 200 civilians as collateral damage. I want answers, Maya, real ones. Maya glanced at the soldiers working around the 737, their Geiger counters clicking ominously. Not here. Not now. At the facility I'll tell you everything. But Kestrel, you need to understand this is bigger than you, bigger than both of us. What's in that cargo hold isn't a weapon, it's proof. Proof of what? That someone in our chain of command has been selling military secrets to the highest bidder for the last 5 years. and they've been using airline cargo holds to move the evidence. You were just unlucky enough to be on the plane they chose today." Morrison felt the world tilt. Maya was talking about treason, high-level conspiracy, the kind of thing that could bring down administrations and start wars. And somehow, a retired fighter pilot serving coffee had stumbled into the middle of it. Valdez's face had gone hard. Who? That's what we're trying to figure out. The investigation's been running for 18 months. We've followed the money, tracked the communications, identified most of the network, but we haven't found the source, the one person at the top coordinating everything. Until today. Maya's eyes locked with Valdez's. "Your name came up in intercepted communications 3 weeks ago. Someone wanted you on this flight specifically. Wanted to see if you'd recognize something in that cargo hold. Something from your deployment in Syria." Understanding dawned in Valdez's eyes. Al-Tanf. Maya nodded. The weapons that went missing after the base was overrun. Everyone assumed insurgents took them. But what if they didn't? What if someone on our side staged the whole thing, made it look like a loss when really it was a sale? Morrison's mind raced through implications. Sophisticated American weapons in enemy hands, the firefights that followed, the casualties. If Maya was right, someone had orchestrated the deaths of American soldiers for profit. Someone with enough authority to move weapons, falsify records, and cover their tracks for 5 years. "You think I know who it was," Valdez said. "It wasn't a question. I think you saw something that day. Something you didn't realize was important at the time. Someone who was there who shouldn't have been, or something about the attack pattern that didn't make sense. You were the tactical lead, Kestrel. You saw everything." Valdez was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant, replaying memories 7 years old. Morrison watched her face, saw the moment something clicked, a connection made, a piece falling into place. "There was a supply officer," Valdez said slowly. "Lieutenant Colonel. He showed up 2 days before the attack. Unannounced inspection," he said, "but his credentials didn't match the chain of command. I flagged it in my report, but nothing came of it." "Do you remember his name?" "Patterson, no, Pattinson, something like that. I only saw him twice. Once at the supply depot. Once," she paused, eyes widening. "Once talking to the local militia liaison, the one who supposedly betrayed our position to the insurgents." Maya's expression was grim. "Colonel Richard Pattinson, currently assigned to the Pentagon. Logistics oversight for the entire Middle East theater. Access to shipping manifests, cargo schedules, flight plans. He could move anything anywhere and make it look legitimate." "And you think he put something on my plane today?" "I think he wanted to see if you'd recognize his name on a manifest, or his signature on a document, something that would trigger your memory and bring you back into the fold. But he underestimated how thoroughly you'd walked away." Maya gestured at Valdez's flight attendant uniform. "Nobody looks for fighter pilots in coach." A hazmat team emerged from the 737, carrying a sealed container. Even from 50 yards away, Morrison could see it was heavy. Military grade. The kind of thing designed to survive crashes, fires, and deliberate attempts to destroy it. Maya's radio crackled and she listened for a moment, her expression darkening. "Confirmed radiological signature," she said. "Low grade. Not weapons material, but enough to be a tracking beacon. He wanted to know where this plane went, who would respond when it went off course. He was testing our network security, seeing who knew what about his operation." "And he used my flight to do it," Valdez said flatly. "Put 200 lives at risk as a test." "He's desperate. We're closing in and he knows it. Desperate people make mistakes. Today was a mistake." Morrison stepped forward. "So what now? We testify. Go into protective custody while you build your case." Maya shook her head. "We need more than testimony. We need evidence that will stand up in military court and civilian prosecution. Pattinson's been careful. Everything's compartmentalized, deniable. We have pieces but not proof of command authority." She turned to Valdez. Unless you can give us something, anything from Altanf that ties him directly to the weapons transfer. Valdez was quiet, thinking. Morrison could see her working through memories, examining them from new angles with the context Maya had provided.